Welcome to this panel. My name is Sarie Mairs Slee, and this afternoon we're going to dig into the question, is Manchester a world-class music city? We're really spoiled with the panelists that we have here today, and we'll just take a second for each person to introduce themselves.
My name's Chris Horkan. I run Hey Manchester, which is an independent gig promoter in Manchester. I've been doing it for 16 years, came into it completely untrained and unqualified and kind of learnt on the job. I work mostly with roots music, so country and folk music, and I do a variety of sizes of shows, anywhere from 50 people in the back room of a pub through to Bridgewater Hall and Albert Hall.
Hi, my name's Debra King. I'm the CEO of Brighter Sound, and I'm also the sector lead for Manchester Music City, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. Brighter Sound's a music organisation and a charity. We're based in Manchester. We work right across the spectrum, really, of talent development, from very sort of young emerging talent through education and schools and learning work, right the way through to more kind of developed emerging talent. We have a strategic role across young people in partnership with youth music, and we also run a gender equality programme which strives for an equal and fair music industry across the north of England, and do a lot of talent development in terms of producing and promoting work and commissioning, and we have a residency model that we've been developing over the last 15 years.
Hi, my name is KSR with the Box Brackets and Spaces. I'm a singer-songwriter from Manchester. That's really it, to be fair. I don't really got much to say. That's about it.
That's great. There'll be more time to say lots of stuff to come. Thank you.
That's all you need to say. My name is Riv Burns, and I am a freelance creative producer and programmer. I'm creative director of a festival called Sarie Mairs Slee, which has been running for the last 18 years this year. We're an annual festival that takes place in Salford, just in the other city, hence the name. I've been involved in that for 13 of the 18 years. So, absolutely love it. Festival of new music, performance and art, basically. It really focuses on the experience for everyone behind the scenes, on the stage and in front of the stage, and creates like quite a magical space, we hope. But I also wear a lot of other hats as well. I recently programmed, along with Dave as well, the Festival Square programme for Manchester International Festival in both 2019 and 2021. And I run a music residency programme called Samabita, which exists to provide time and space for artists to collaborate and make music outside of the parameters of the normal music industry of write the record, tour the record, go back to writing another record. So just a time and space to just have fun and be creative, basically. That's me.
I'm Dave Haslam. I've been a DJ for 40 years, in the 80s at the Hacienda, in the 90s at the Boardwalk, and I still DJ a lot. And I'm a live music and club promoter. I've staged events with Primal Scream, James, Sonic Youth, Spacemen 3, more recently stuff with Riv, stuff of my own with younger bands, Working Men's Club, Orioles, Lounge Society, and also I am a writer and a journalist, and I've written several books, mostly cultural history.
Fantastic, thank you. Last but not least.
Hi, my name's Oliver Wilson. I've worked in the music business since I was a teenager. Currently, I'm what you would describe as a social entrepreneur. I have a food charity supporting people in need in Manchester, and I'm also part of the team behind Beyond the Music, which is an international music conference launching in Manchester this year.
Fantastic. I mean, really are spoiled. I can't wait to get into the conversation and just hear from everybody's points of view. I think before we go too deep, Deborah, it would be fantastic if you told us a little bit about the Manchester Music Project, what it's involved, what led up to it, and all the important stuff that you want to share.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so just to talk a bit about Manchester Music City and where it started from, really. I think it started in the thoughts around it started in 2019 after the GMCA, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, commissioned a music industry review, and also Marketing Manchester commissioned a music tourism review. And I think some of those findings were really striking about the music sector. One of them, for example, is music tourism alone generated 169 million in Greater Manchester in 2017. So I think across partners across the city, we responded to that scale of opportunity and growth and ways of working across the city. And we joined the Music Cities Network, which is an international network of music cities, which I now chair, and we established the Manchester Music City project, which you were talking about just earlier on. I think really the overarching ambition around that is for Manchester to be a successful music city, to attract, to grow and retain talent. And I guess with a music business community that's reflective of who's in the city, so it's a really diverse city, and a thriving live music ecology, and good audiences for live and visiting music audiences. And I guess it's right across the economic, social, cultural and health benefits of music to be felt across the city, because all of those things are equally important, I think, and all add to what being a music city means. I think obviously since 2019, the initiative's been hindered by COVID. It's really challenged everything in the sector, and the City Council really focused on supporting live music, the music economy, and with grants. We worked with Venues Trust and various other initiatives to try and support individual artists and venues across the city. But we formed a steering group, and we've held consultation events, and we've just finished, Sound Diplomacy have just finished a detailed economic research piece of work, which we're going to get the findings of very soon. We also commissioned a classical music audiences study. We supported a new zine project, which is coming through, and also just recently commissioned a brand. And we've also sort of think it's really important to attract major events to the city as well. So we set up an executive group and developed a proposal to attract Womex in 2024. So I think it's about connecting more broadly across the city. It's thinking about Manchester even more so on a global scale, and connecting with the Greater Manchester Music Commission that's been set up, that we're also part of, and I think Rivka and some of us on this panel are also part of Ollie is as well. And also like major events like Beyond the Music that Ollie was talking about earlier on, and that's kind of, I think there's just that understanding that, as there always has been really for a long time, that music is so much part of Manchester's DNA, and it has so much power to change things and to influence things. And I think historically we've been part of that change across the UK, internationally. It's a really recognised brand, I think, internationally. So yeah, I could talk for ages, so I'll stop there and talk as we go along. Yeah,
and jump back if anything else comes up.
I will.
I think on the back of that, thinking about your point about music being part of Manchester's DNA, I want to focus a little bit on people who make music and make music happen as the sort of starting point for our discussion. So if we think back a little bit, Manchester has a well-earned reputation for music, and it's built global names, artists, bands, ensembles. But in terms of looking back, what feels fundamental in what made that music and built that reputation? And I might come to you first, Dave, if that's all right.
Well, I think the common thread really isn't necessarily to do with the end product, which has to be diverse and has been diverse. But it's more to do with the process that people go through. And the common thread is that people have been resourceful and they've believed in what they've done. And that DIY independent spirit is what fueled all the stuff at the end of the 70s, from Buzzcocks, The Fall, Factory Records, but also right through to where we are now. And I think that's the key thing, is that spirit. I mean, it doesn't mean that people can be left alone and that somehow they will magically create stuff out of nothing. There's still lots of interventions that we can all do to help that happen and to enable people. But I think that the common thread is that vibrancy and that independence, and that just doing stuff for the love of it, making it happen. And what happens is that gives what we create in Manchester authenticity, because people can tell it's coming from here. It's not manufactured. And I think that's what brings all the generations together.
Absolutely, and I think sometimes when we talk about music, trying to separate the impact of the music after it's made, after it's heard, and what happens to the moment where before it first reaches our ears or our eyes or our bodies, that disconnect could be hard to wrestle with in terms of impact and also future. Ali, how about your perspective in terms of things that have come together to grow a reputation and also from the inside that brought people together to be more than just their thing?
Yeah, I think there's two things really, and I'll quote my dad here: cheap and abundant space is something that he used to speak about in the 80s, that there was loads of room to go and do whatever you needed to do, whether it was rehearse, whether it was rave, whether it was hang out and meet people. We don't have that now, and I think we need to talk about not just COVID, we need to talk about neoliberalism and managing that in our city. That's not here anymore. I mean, we have Brunswick Mill, which is fantastic rehearsal space, but even those guys are having to move out pretty soon. The other thing is, and it's what you speak about, Dave, is this punk ethos of Manchester, of getting out there and making it happen. And I think that's what we do have, but I just think we're living in a way more complicated age now. And I think punk was maybe in a simpler time. Things were a bit more straightforward to go out and make it happen. We're living in a really complicated time right now. And I think there's a lot to be said probably later in this conversation about education and access and support and that kind of stuff. So I think the things that really made it for us in the 80s, or some of the things that I've mentioned, perhaps don't exist anymore. And we're talking about Manchester's DNA. You know, you've got to realise the DNA has been extracted out of this town and used to fire business models for estate agents and property speculators. And there's actually a great article by John Silver, who's an academic at the university here, about the long 90s and the housing crisis in Manchester, and how the 80s and the 90s and our musical and cultural legacy has been used as a vehicle for the business models that we're witnessing now. So, yeah, perhaps these things don't exist anymore, and perhaps we need to look at the effects of neoliberalism on our city and how to deal with it.
And we'll just come back about the complicated versus simple. I mean, the world has always been complicated. In some ways, it's more simple now for an artist to reach an audience. Because in the 80s, if you had music and you wanted to reach an audience, it was hard enough reaching an audience in your own postcode. You'd have to find a venue. Now, your music can find people around the world by uploading it. And so all that system of, we need a major record label, we need a full colour 12-inch sleeve, we need an advert in the NME, all that's gone. And that's what used to happen.
Yeah.
And so the simplicity and the complications have just changed. But I don't think that the musicians and the artists in Manchester now have it any worse than any previous generation.
Well, I think we could probably stick on that point for the rest of the panel, but I want to jump on that and bring it into kind of the next stage of the question, and that's, if you think about new upcoming talent, people that have made music and are ready to make that first touch with audiences, what feels fundamental now, maybe drawing from some of the DNA and the things that have existed over the last 40 years, not existed, grown, accumulated over the last 40 years, and what feels really fresh and important now. So I might come to you first, Chris, if that's all right.
I think something, I mean, you mentioned about cheap and abundant space, you know, there maybe isn't that kind of rehearsal studio space quite so much these days, but we're not short of venues and very good quality venues. So that's something that I'd say right now is working really well in the city, you know, right from the smallest possible space, you know, the Castle Hotel or something like that, right through to somewhere like Albert Hall, which would be, for any city in the country and probably in the world, you know, a gem, and everywhere in between. So that's definitely something that I think is in Manchester's favour right now.
That's really great to hear. In terms of fundamental identity and what feels really distinct or new, how about from your perspective, Debra?
I was just thinking about, you know, the fact that it feels a lot more kind of representative of different communities in Manchester now. And, you know, when you think of Manchester's population And, you know, I know there's a new census just about to come out, isn't there? But I think there was a census in before, I don't know how many years ago, that was, you know, looking at kind of populations within schools and, you know, so many different people from different parts of the world, different ethnicities in schools. I think it's 60% or something, and that's bound to have tripled, quadrupled now. So we're talking about a truly diverse city, and I think that's changing, and it's changing all the time. I think that's really exciting. And it's what Ollie was saying earlier on about, you know, how we access those different communities of musicians that are growing in different ways, musicians, producers, managers, promoters and stuff, that I think, you know, a lot of people are talking about, you know, and a lot of people really want to put energy into and are putting energy into, but it's bringing that up, and that accessibility that I think is a really important thing. And, you know, it's the barriers and it's about structural change of the industry, and the neoliberalism thing that you were saying, Ollie, really rang a bell with me. But I think it's also about the industry structurally changing, fundamentally changing, and people standing by that and really shifting on that. You know, not just musicians coming in, but also leadership. Leadership's got to be different. You know, what does leadership in the industry look like, and how should it change? And, you know, there's lots of thoughts about that I have that I think are really fundamental to a sort of a great future for Manchester and Greater Manchester in the music sector.
It feels really healthy to hear discussing talent, but always about people, because people have talent. Talent doesn't just walk around on its own. And I think there's some interesting ideas around, new artists, emerging artists. I'd be really interested to hear reflections about maybe what isn't always visible when we think of what we mean by a new artist in terms of emerging talent or nurturing talent, which means nurturing people. Any thoughts on that in terms of people coming into the industry and what we might not expect to see but do?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I kind of was very blind to it all. I was just very much, I just wanted to just sing, tell my story, and just kind of just upload it. And I didn't know much about it. I just thought I was just gonna upload my music and just get on with my day-to-day life. But then you eventually realize there are actually people that want to actually, like, kind of not obviously turn you into an artist to a degree. And at the time, I did want to be an artist. I did like gain all the tools to become a great a good singer and a good writer. But it started off just in a bedroom. You know, I was saying before, I went and worked a summer and just went and bought my whole equipment, and I still didn't know how to use it. I just had to use YouTube just to kind of process everything and understand how just recording just worked. And after a while, I always kind of said to myself, I'm just learning on the job. I will never get this right. But there are obviously there are other artists that are around me who have been in the industry for X amount of years and are willing to guide me. And again, like you were saying, having that kind of leadership, which again is very, very rare. Luckily, I had the likes of Children's Zeus, DRS, like the list can go on, that have kind of like took me under their wing and showed me how the scene works, especially how the scene in Manchester works, first and foremost, because again, this is where I live, and this is where the city's majority of the time are gonna see me, you know. And so getting on this the stages like Band on the Wall, again, that was my first time ever performing and showing the world what I could do. And it means a lot, because for me, it's I just know that's where it started. And 5 years later, I'm here doing this panel, explaining that feeling of what it feels like at first. But you do realize at the same time there are like downsides to this whole thing. Not everything's ever gonna be perfect or it's gonna go the way you want it to be. But I feel like you have to have a mindset of just being able to just switch it on and be like, all right, cool. I failed the first time or the second and third time, but I'm willing to make sure that this one in particular thing is not perfect, but it's right for people to be like, oh, we acknowledge you, we know what you're doing. But I feel like, again, being an R&B and soul singer, it's hard, because we're already having to fight that, not just within Manchester, but within the whole more or less the UK for now. Like R&B and soul isn't being appreciated in that kind of way. So it's very much, I'm already having to face another battle.
Yeah.
You know, having to again try and get in the venues, because majority of the time, not a lot of the venues don't want to be hearing R&B and soul. But again, times have changed, especially in the last 2 years. Well, I'd say 2 to 3 years. The way how, again, the UK's taken to soul, and I wouldn't just say the UK, just the whole world in general, how soul and R&B is being represented, and it's being represented in a really good way. But to talk about Manchester, I feel like it's been represented really, really well. So, yeah.
I mean, in a time when change just like defines every meal we eat, every news round, trying to figure out what we drive in that and what happens to us and how to negotiate that. I mean, that's an ongoing thing. But recognizing where there is shift and you step into it. I'm also really interested to hear your phrase when somebody wanted to make me an artist, and that difference between having space to make the music, and when being an artist becomes being somebody else's asset. And that shifting sand space in that is something that, I mean, I'm sure we'll come back to it, but I just want to acknowledge that really strong connection. I think to kind of round up this bit of talking about music makers and people that make music happen, if people that don't know, if this isn't their home, if this is not the streets they walk, and they have a fixed idea about what Manchester music is, and you'd like to shake it up a bit, what would you like to kind of, what seeds would you want to plant in that identity about what is the Manchester music scene now? You know, the last 5 years, including the 2 or 3 that you were making reference to.
Personally, I think that Manchester's kind of neo-soul and jazz scenes have just taken off in such a huge way, and kind of being probably more recognised maybe outside of Manchester than within Manchester to start with. Like, you look at kind of a lineup like We Out Here, for example, and there's so many Manchester names on that bill, and it's like a national festival, like curated by Giles Peterson, and it's like, that's something to be proud of. And like KSR's on that lineup and playing on the main stage with like Children of Zeus, it's like mind-blowing, and that gives you this sense of pride, which I think Manchester is like has really strongly in terms of, as we talked about, the DNA. Like, that is, I think we all carry music around with us, and we're proud of what we've got. And I think, so for me, that scene is kind of starting to challenge this idea of what Manchester music is, because I think a lot of people, if you ask them that question, it's probably nothing that was made pre-1998, let's say. Nothing the other way around, but you know what I mean. I think that's exciting, because that's starting to get shaken up, and I think it goes back to that kind of attitude that you were talking about as well, Dave, because I think in that scene, in particular the jazz scene, like, people are kind of, lots of collaboration and kind of like that, where there's a will, there's a way, and like kind of talking about DRS kind of mentoring you and stuff, and it's like that giving to that next generation and supporting that emerging, like, who wants to do stuff now, and so that attitude is still there in terms of that collaboration and support from between different sectors of the industry as well, from venues and festivals all the way through to artists supporting each other. Like, it's not a competitive city, it feels like one of real support and kind of love. So yeah, I'd say for me it's that kind of scene for me feels really exciting, one that I'm dead into.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think Manchester music at the moment is like, there's two sides to it, really. There's the music that everybody sees from outside the city, and there's the music that's actually going on here. This city is bursting at the seams with music, and to echo Riv's comments on neo soul, etc. And I'm really sorry, and it's nothing personal at all, and great bands, and I'm sure they do great business, but if the biggest bands to come out of Manchester are the 1975 and the Blossoms, where's the protest music? Where's the diversity? I don't think we're exporting representative music at the moment. And that's why it's great that we're sitting down and having these conversations and trying to find ways of changing things. But definitely, I feel like there's a singular narrative from this city which seems to be middle class, white, middle of the road indie pop music. And there's loads more here to offer.
I think, it's one reason why, to be selfish, I was really excited when I got to do this panel, because this particular question, what's a world-class music city? I mean, that is a brilliant strapline, fantastic, and well-earned. But what does it mean if it's a dynamic, living thing? And there are so many themes that have been pulled out already, but an honest, rather than a heritage piece, what is this beating heart? What actually keeps the blood moving around the city now?
I agree. Sorry,
Please,
I agree definitely about brand Manchester music as being problematic in how partial the view from outside of the city is. I mean, I've curated quite a lot of events outside of Manchester, in fact, outside of the UK. And I remember doing a weekend in Italy, and they asked me to pick a Manchester act to represent Manchester. And I picked Lines, all female band. And I could sense their disappointment, because it didn't tarry with their perception of what a Manchester band was. And they found it really hard to sell to an audience in Italy, because it wasn't, four lads with their coats on, strumming along in the style that Ollie has just described. And so that is, if you were talking if you had the ability to market Manchester music differently, if those levers did exist, I don't even know if they do really, because how do you change perception on that level? You would definitely have to try and push a much wider narrative about the stories that are being told and the music that's being made.
Just to echo that, two of my favourite Manchester acts right now are both American. You've got BC Camplight and Jessica Hoop. And I've worked with them for a long time now, and like I said, if people ask me what's great out of Manchester right now, they're the first two that probably come to mind. And it's the fact that they've chosen to set up home here and live here for however long they have is kind of a good sign for the city itself, and they're coming from Manchester now and going out and getting bigger around the UK and around the world from being based in Manchester, but they're not from here. They don't sound like they're from Manchester, obviously, but it works for them.
Yeah, I think there's something about, is it worth a city? Is a city that still draws people to do the thing, to make the music, to write the music, to produce the actual act before it ever reaches an audience? And if there are still things that draw, because it's, again, loving the architecture, it's not architecture that brings people to a city, it's people that bring people to a city. And so I think that's really helpful to hear as a point, that magnetism still exists, but maybe not for the reasons that we assume the royal way. So, but thinking kind of from the music makers to shifting to music lovers and audiences, knowing that sometimes those are all the same people, I want to kind of turn the subject to venues and festivals, and just for the moment to think pre-COVID. We will get to where we all sit now. But if we think about, venues, festivals, and the places where we get to experience music together live, in person, what feels like some of the common vibes or feelings, and I'm going to just chuck a couple other questions in there. What's important when we're thinking and talking about Manchester's live music scene? And, with a Salford hat on, should we be talking about Greater Manchester when we think of the way these things come together in the live music scene? Chris, I might come back to you first, if I may.
I've kind of jumped the gun a little bit with the venues.
I love it. Keep going. Keep going.
So yeah, I think we're spoiled, and at every level as well. From the tiniest place through to the large concert halls and even bigger, really. And I think what is special about them is they've all got character. You think about a lot of other cities, like main touring venues, they're black boxes, and they're no different from any other city. And if you consider what Manchester has to offer, I venue manage the Cathedral here, which is quite a large venue that's been for over 10 years hosting the likes of Elbow and Alicia Keys, as well as more less poppy acts, I'd say. The fact that our cathedral hosts major events 10, 15 times a year is quite exceptional, really, I'd say, compared to a lot of other cities.
Absolutely. And that sort of moving away from architecture, we could be anywhere, is something I hope we don't lose. I hope we don't lose as a city.
Yeah. And I think as well, the other thing, sorry, just going back to the cathedral example, the people who run these organisations and buildings just being up for giving things a go, I think is quite important. You know, approaching the cathedral 12 years ago and saying, can we put an event in there? And them saying yes. You know, again, you probably wouldn't have even gotten to a meeting point in quite a few other cities. So I think there's something quite specific to Manchester and the people that work and live here, where they're just up for giving things a go, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that, not only in terms of people that, you know, you've got to see it to be it, but also you've got to be able to view it to do it. Once one place does it, then you think, oh, well, we could try that. I think that's a really important one to highlight. How about you, Riv?
It goes back to that trust and collaboration again, doesn't it? It's like people kind of just trusting in a sound or trusting in a person, and like it's people-centered, isn't it? And it's like, yeah, okay, I like you, I like music, I'll give this a go. And like, what can go wrong? We just won't do it again if it does go wrong. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know, it's exciting, but I think from like a festival's perspective as well, and I guess in a similar way, like just the way that we operate with sounds, like we work with promoters, and I think that's something that's super exciting in Manchester as well, that I don't know how that kind of just the depth and the breadth of the types of promoters that we have in the city are amazing. Like back in 2018 when we last did a big one, we worked with like 27 different promoters who all brought their flavour and sound to Salford for one day. Do you know what I mean? And so you get everything from like folk to Americana to kind of techno to grime to soul and metal, like, and Manchester has spaces where all of those things can happen, and there's kind of a venue for each of those kind of genres as well, like, and that's what I think is nice about the spaces here, is like that kind of character kind of starts to reflect the people within it and the people on the stage as well. So you know that if you want to go and see like the new hip band, like you probably go to Yes. You know, if you like, there's a venue for everything. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, I think that's really special. And from a festival perspective as well, I think like we have so many. Like back when we started Sounds, kind of 18 years ago, there was kind of 2 maybe, and now there's a festival for whatever you're kind of into, really, from punk fest through to sounds through to neighbourhood, and I think it's exciting, but there's still room for more. I think as well, and like it's really exciting hearing about Beyond the Music and stuff, and how that could be another one of those things that just brings people together in terms of those different sounds and sights, because Manchester isn't about one thing, even though maybe the outside perspective sometimes maybe thinks it is.
I think that creative programming is really important. I mean, because the other thing about the venues and the promoters and creative programming is it brings artists from outside of Manchester into the city. I was looking at Kim Gordon's tour dates in May, and she's doing, I think, 12 dates in the whole of Europe. And one of them is at Gorilla in Manchester. And so that will bring people from all over the north of England to the venue, but it will also give artists who are here and audiences a chance to see her play. And that is often, it's not just about somewhere for the local bands to play, it's somewhere for the local bands to go to be inspired by acts from outside of the city. Because that's how creativity works, by absorbing influences that are outside of your own life that somehow resonate with your life. And that melding of that is what really makes creativity work. And that spark can just come from, giving a live act a chance in a small venue.
I was just going to add to that, actually, because I think you're right. And I think the other thing that I've really noticed since I've been in Manchester, which has been a long time now, is just that creative collaboration that you were talking about, Rivka, and, you know, that kind of thing of the residencies that you've been doing, the residencies that we've been doing, where we're bringing artists from different genres together, emerging talent, bringing them together and creating new music, new creations, you know, within a short space of time, and then showcasing that work. I guess what's really interesting about that is its audiences come to that, they're interested in that, and there's a sense, I think, with Manchester that Manchester audiences are happy to experience that risk, you know, of coming along, listening to stuff that's brand new, that's really newly created, that's kind of just raw. And I think that, for me, that's something that I think is great about the city. There's a real appetite for it, I think.
I think that 2 points that I'd love to draw on. One on is collaboration and how many points and people working together. Almost nothing is ever made on your own. Almost nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe something is, but I just can't think of any now. Everything is based on collaboration in terms of making stuff. But on the other side, that sense of being up to try something, being able to try new music, to hear something, give it a go, and being able to do that in person and live. You just can't. I love, being on my own with music and living with whatever's happening in my head, but it's a completely different thing to be breathing the same air and sharing the same thrum beat at the same time. There was one other point I wanted to pick up is sometimes we think of musicians and audiences where that is a fat Venn diagram where there's a lot in the center, and understanding how much hearing music and connecting with other artists is just vital in terms of that making process. I could keep going with this more, but I would love to hear, number one, a little bit more about the new Beyond the Music program that you were talking about. Just love to make a little space for that if I can.
Sure, of course. So Beyond the Music, wow. Exists in a slight time warp at the moment because it did actually begin just before COVID. So there was just a number of voices in the city that were saying, there was an international music conference that happened here in the 90s and the early 2000s, and a couple of people came to us saying, what's happened to it? We want this international music conference happening here in Manchester. We went down to London to gauge interest from the major labels and the trade bodies and people that come to these type of things, and everybody was like, we're not allowed to swear on this, are we? F yeah, bring it back. We'll all book hotel rooms, and got working on it. And then COVID hit, and then some other younger business people from Manchester got in touch and said, what's going on? We want this to happen. And that was basically it. Right, we've got to do this. We launched, so we were going to do a one-day special event last year to invite everybody down, but we'd not even had a chance to speak to the Manchester community yet. So we did a Manchester symposium, which was an afternoon of 3 forums, and we invited the Manchester creative community, or at least as many people as we could in the period of time that we'd arranged it in. And had an amazing day. Got a lot of talking points going. I think a lot that we're going to touch on in this, but sorry, I'm probably divulging a bit here. Beyond the Music is a 3-day international music conference that's going to be hosted at the Midland Hotel, and there's going to be a new music festival wrapped around it as well that's going to take over the city centre. The conference that's happening in the Midland is for global industry to come and talk about what's happening in the industry right now, and definitely there's appetite for something like that to happen because everything's changing in the industry. And the conference that happened in the 90s, a lot of things that they were preaching and discussing then, they've happened. So it's a great time to bring it back internationally in that context, and it's a great time to bring it back in terms of Manchester as well because there's so much to talk about. And attached to the conference is a music festival, and we want to promote Manchester. We want to make it an international destination for gig goers. We're starting off focusing on the Northern Quarter in the first year, but want to grow it year on year, ultimately to create a festival map with different zones of Manchester.
And it sounds like, this has come up again, but the internal dialogue blending with the dialogue with others, and how that it's fundamental to be able to have these things connected rather than just concentric circles talking around each other all the time.
Exactly. So the tagline of it is change or die, which is quite antagonistic to the industry that's coming, but it's certainly like the tone that we want to set. And essentially what my desire is to have the industry here in the Midland and have all of the new business and the new ways of doing things and put them together and let's see what happens there. And I definitely think Manchester needs to challenge the industry and needs to challenge conventions, and we're hoping that this will be a forum to do that. And, we don't, like you were saying, we don't just want to go around in circles. That every panel and forum that we're doing, we want tangible outcomes from. So we want to change things. We want to start things. We want to do things differently. To quote a phrase, the conference that happened in the 90s. In 92, I think the first one was where the Music Managers Forum first got together. And, you know, this is the hotel where Rolls met Royce and all this kind of stuff. So we definitely want to embody the legacy of Manchester as a city of firsts as well.
Excellent, and thank you for, I hope you didn't divulge too much, and if you did, thank you very much for everybody who's in the room. I would love to switch the conversation to really be looking at the time we've been living in, the time we've been living through, and where we're working, operating, and living now in terms of the way that COVID has changed anything live, anything face-to-face, and as a creative act, the ability to have sustainable careers through this amount of shift. So there's a lot to be talking about in terms of streaming and platforms and the interface with audience, but I really want to start with a lot of the music making that isn't on view, that isn't in the spotlight. You know, if thinking about an iceberg, most of it sits under the waterline, and we can't see it until it's too late. So if we think about Manchester's music ecosystem, and thinking about a health ecosystem has health at every level, if it's all going to function. What's vital about being a world-class music city that sits outside the spotlight or outside the public view, but yet is fundamental to that health at levels in all of them? So I'll start with you, Debra, and then we'll work around. If you want to say something, then just, as always, jump in.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying all of that. I mean, I think obviously it's been so challenging, and, you know, I think there's an MU stat, isn't there, that 30% of musicians have moved to different careers, and, you know, I mean, it's kind of, we were just talking about touring just earlier on, weren't we? And how that has kind of just massively changed and will change, you know, and it's still affecting us now. So, yeah, that I think that's inevitable. I think it's something about, you know, the faith in the industry in terms of that next generation coming through, or people staying in it that are in it, and how we as an industry, I mean, like Ollie was saying about, you know, radical change and change or dies. Yeah, really good phrases, and, you know, it's that thing of how can we be supportive to that? How can we create sustainable and meaningful careers? How can people feel okay about what they're doing and be attracted to it still, so we can keep that talent coming in? Because, you know, if you're talking about talent, then you need talent from every sector of the community, and if there's no economic viability there and it's really kind of vulnerable, then is that going to happen? Are people going to be, you know, the DIY thing that you were talking about earlier on, Dave, you know, is that something that's still going to happen, or are people just, you know, nervous, scared, you know, not able to do it? And I think there's that, it's about articulating something about that goes on all the time. Anyway, that creative music making, where does it take you to, and what are the real opportunities, and what can we, I guess, as a city, really carve out for people or support people in those journeys and that professional development.
In terms of professional development and making it happen and being able to sustain, I would love to hear a little bit from you, Dave.
Well, I mean, one of the challenges with COVID, I was reading the other day about provision of music tuition in schools, and obviously that's just been decimated. And the figure was something like 10% of all schools have done nothing to do with music in the last 2.5 years. Nothing at all, even though it's in the curriculum. And 75% of them have done a lot less than they normally would. So in terms of talking about career development, those are lost years. And in terms of music, you know, 2.5 years is almost a generation, you know. So there's a specific issue to do with schools and how that, I mean, for me, it's just highlighted how vulnerable that part of music education is. So that is for me something quite an important thing. I mean, I think that the economic viability of a music career is a Manchester problem, but it's a global problem. And, you know, in terms of change or die, that is probably one of the biggest things. How can musicians make a living, you know? And I think that no one's worked that one out yet. People are like, oh, merch. We can sell merch. Well, if you're not doing gigs, you're not selling merch, you know. And or if the venues are taking 20% of all your merch, then that's your profit margin gone anyway. So that's an important thing, because Manchester is not a wealthy city. Most of the people who live in Manchester are not wealthy people. They haven't got a way of subsidising what they do, apart from finding other jobs. And the minute you take another job and you're a musician, then that can often sabotage your career because you're being dragged away all the time, you know? So that's a major problem. I haven't got an answer to it. I'm just pointing out that sometimes we can talk about a Manchester issue and forget that actually it's something much, much bigger to do with a change in the culture. And, you know, maybe we can find a few things that we can do. But you know, ultimately, the creative arts are not supported by the government. They're not sympathetic in any way to the creative arts being taught at school. They're not sympathetic to a lot of what they still will consider low culture. So, you know, we are up against it.
I think highlighting, I mean, whilst there has been investment in culture through the pandemic, in England at least, most of that money went into buildings, into sustaining venues. Now you might go excellent or disastrous or somewhere in between, but that most of the money has been invested in keeping buildings open and alive rather than people. Not all, but the lion's share. And in terms of losing 30% of the, you know, professionals in music, not just musicians, across the creative sector, you know, or creative and cultural sectors, we've lost 25% of the sector altogether. So being able to, you know, there might be a sense from people outside music or I'm going to just say the creative industries, it's not just the arts, but that somehow it'll just keep going. It won't if you don't keep cultivating ground and planting seeds and supporting people to make music before they make it their career, then you know, that ecosystem will not just regenerate itself. I'd love to, in terms of thinking about what's outside the spotlight, what's, if you will, away from an audience's point of view, what feels vital to you, your work, but also, you know, other people you work alongside.
I think for me, like, I always base like my music on just being a collective thing. It's like involving friends, family, other musicians. I don't like to kind of just keep it all separated because I feel like the way I make music is always telling a story about individual people or as a collective. I'm only speaking about, well, I won't say I'm only speaking about one specific type of people, but I feel like right now I'm in a space where I'm talking about where I'm from, my community, the people that look like me, and I'm not having the chances to be able to, again, perform at these like great venues, perform at these great festivals, and it's really, really hard because it's like I'm just one individual, and I'm not going to say that I'm perfect because I know I'm not perfect, but for what it is, I will give my 100% to make sure that you understand that me getting to this point was never easy, but it took you to help me because I don't know, you may have told me something about your personal life, and I just decided to just talk about it. But best believe it's not just my music; it's actually my music, and for others as well that have took a part of like playing their role of creating, I don't know, a line, a melody, or a bass line. I don't know. It's just one of those things. I always try to make sure that it's a collective thing, and we were speaking before about how it's like. Music, okay, for example, we say music's like much more of a community thing, but then you have to realise only a lucky few are able to do it. So we're here sitting down and saying, oh, like, it's great we have all these venues and these festivals, and I'm so happy for that we have them. But best believe there's someone that looks like me, or there's a girl that looks like me that doesn't get that opportunity. And from the area that I live in, it's like, okay, what can I do? What can I really do to be one of the lucky ones to just be here and perform and write? And I'm getting to meet all these other people like yourselves right now. But then what's my kind of message at the end of the day? I mean, how I see it is that if you love something so much and you can't turn away from it, then you just got to go the extra mile for it and just make sure you achieve what you wanted to achieve, because it can be taken away from you very, very suddenly. And that's one thing I've always been aware of, learned, from just being from my own community as well, just witnessing that life could be gone all of a sudden. And then what have you got after that? You're just a corpse, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's something about, we talk a lot, and rightly so, about developing talent. We don't always talk about developing agency, the power and the drive to do the thing, to say the thing and make the change, whether it's just for yourself or with or for other people. But that idea of, it's not just about talent, it's about agency. And musicians aren't just music makers, they're of course people. And taking that wider view about not only the music you make, but the change we could make, I think is a brilliant point. I want to take us forward into kind of the final stage of the panel to think a little bit towards the future. And so I'm going to ask a really naughty question and ask you to just start by filling in the blank of this sentence. So for some people, change and risk is absolutely terrifying. And for other people, it's completely exhilarating and the fuel to make good stuff happen. COVID has brought its own word bank and special brew and vocabulary set in terms of change and risk. But change and risk demand bravery. Otherwise, you don't make it through. So thinking of the future of Manchester as a world-class music city, I want you to each to just complete this statement. If we were brave, we would. And I'm going to start with you.
Yes. Create something brand new is what I think of.
I think if we were brave, we'd change the power structures that exist. We'd actually actively change them, and the leadership structures, and we'd see what we could do to act to make that difference rather than talk about it endlessly, which I think I've been doing for years since I've been working in the music sector. I think it's that action. That's the thing we've got to be brave about, and it is being brave because, as you were saying earlier on, there aren't those kind of role models out there. There isn't that open door for a lot of people. So it is being brave. It's about being brave on so many different levels to make that music sector work and thrive in the way that we'd like it to post-pandemic. And I think the pandemic, it's an opportunity to really change, to shift things. That go back to that change or die thing again. I think absolutely that's the way it is. So in a way, the music sector's got a challenge. Well, let's take that challenge on, but do something that actually means that we're making a difference.
Fantastic. So we have create something new, change the power and leadership structures, act, not talk. How about you? If we were brave, we would.
If we were brave, I guess we would succeed. That's just me being honest.
We can stop there. No.
How
about you?
I think if we were brave, I think we would challenge the gatekeepers and make long-lasting change and rebuild with that in mind. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. So we have, if we were brave, we would succeed. If we were brave, we would challenge the gatekeepers and rebuild with the change we want in mind. Yeah. How about you, Dave?
If we were brave, I think we would introduce universal basic income in Greater Manchester so that everyone had the space in their lives to think about what they wanted to do with their lives and to create. And it's like it would be like a massive subsidy to people's innate creativity. And it would be fantastic. Throughout Greater Manchester, that's everywhere from, reach out, Rochdale, Oldham, not just, Chiltern.
Absolutely. I want to applaud you, and I am in my head, just so you know. To you, Ali. How about you?
Just linking back to what we were talking about a minute ago, I think we need to create a middle ground where it's not boom or bust, where you're not broke or a millionaire. I think we need to create sustainable careers and pathways into that for everybody in Manchester. I think if we were brave, we would do that. If we were brave, I think we would take our TV licence back and build something around that and start broadcasting and promoting the people, the businesses, the artists that we have here in this city. I think we should have a marketing budget to promote artists in our city. I think there should be billboards up and down the street with local faces on it, not national and international faces.
All right, so again, we could just end there. What fantastic responses. But pushing further, so in terms of all of the responses, creating something new, changing power and leadership structures, acting, not talking, succeeding. just deciding that's what we're going to do. Challenge the gatekeepers in rebuilding with change in mind, looking at the fundamentals like universal basic income, and everyone, not just musicians, everyone, everywhere, not just the city center. Thinking about middle ground where people can build and grow. So, and lots more in that we're not talking about the extremes, and the people whose faces we already know coming back to us again and again. With that in mind, and thinking of your response and the others, what's the risk if we don't do these things? If we aren't brave? And anybody can jump in.
I guess there's not going to be a generation which, again, we're talking about how Manchester's a great scene, but then that kind of quote is not going to be with us anymore. If that's the case, if no young kid is kind of just looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, "Oh, I just want to do this." Mm-hmm. And again, it doesn't have to just be music. It's whatever it is in your life. If you have a passion for something, go and achieve it. Like, go get it. If you really think it's yours, then you have to go out and you have to. I feel like you just got to have a different mindset as well, because it's not. Again, we're not here just. Well, I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm just here because I'm just here. I put in the work, but again, it's that kind of thing. Having that mentality, the mindset, and the support system around you to just be like, oh, do you want to be a doctor? Or you want to be a lawyer? Or you want to be a musician? Cool, I'm here for you. What do you need me to do? That's just how it is. And again, there's not many of that kind of support system around, like we're saying. So, yeah, if that doesn't happen, if we're not able to encourage the next generation and people are around us, then best believe that quote won't be with us no more.
Yeah, the mentality, but the support to help that mentality move from talking to action. Fab. Who else in terms of what's the risk if we don't do some of these things, all these things?
I think we'll end up with really bland music that's really boring, because it'll just be from people that can afford to make it, rather than from the richness of people that can make music from across all different sectors of the community. I think that's the real risk. And, if that creativity that we've all been talking about and that collaboration, if we don't do something about it, that's just it's going to fall out, I think. And, I think, and if the industry doesn't change to recognise the value of that, I think we're going to end up with losing the kind of exciting music that people are producing and just having the same old. So that would be my fear if we didn't do something about it as well, one of my fears.
I think it ties both in with the middle ground point, but also that point about making people aware that you don't need to be, you don't need to be headlining the arena in 5 years. You don't need to be even a full-time musician or a full-time whatever. If you can, make what you want to do sustainable week by week, month by month, year by year, then that's successful, really. What I do, for, in terms of promoting live music, it's not a full-time living, and I'm happy that I've been doing it for 15, 16 years now, and that's absolutely fine. I do it alongside other things so I can make my life sustainable. And I think just making people aware, if they're getting into live music, if they're getting into music in general, you don't need to be making yourself a millionaire. You don't, that's not the vital thing. The vital thing is contributing to the music community and contributing your music if you're a musician.
Absolutely, and by making it visible how it's possible, because it's a struggle and it's a privilege, and it's really hard to find the privilege when you're struggling, whoever that might be. But yeah, making it visible, these ways are possible, but also these supports needed. Fantastic, thank you. Rivka, to you.
I think we run the risk of becoming stale and just staying in, becoming a historical city rather than an internationally recognised city. For now, we become a recognised city for history, because the next generation aren't coming through, and that next generation might be 35 years old. We're not necessarily talking about 16-year-olds. We might also be talking about 60-year-olds. It's like having those opportunities across the board, I think, is really important and needs to be thought about. But then I think also one thing that we haven't really touched on, that I think is also crucial to that kind of keeping things alive is what happens behind the scenes too. So we might have musicians ready to perform on a stage, but if we might not have anybody to run the desk, and so how do we we need to challenge that as well now, and like thinking about rebuilding, like how do we get more people from areas where that's never been seen as a career that you can do. Like how do we encourage people to get involved with that as well? So talking about like getting more women behind those scenes and things like that. So yeah, I think we just run the risk of stopping still when we've actually got a real opportunity right now to do something different. Fantastic. To use that famous quote again.
I think that the risk is that we end up in a city full of shiny buildings where people are either asleep or it's a retail emporium in which they're consuming. And if you've got a city where people are either asleep or consuming, it's the exact opposite of what we want, which is a city of people awake and producing.
Yeah. Beautiful juxtaposition to each other. Yeah, making, producing, and awake, alive. From the
I don't think that it won't happen, so I can't imagine it. I think the only way is forward for us, and I already think there's so much positive momentum here right now, new momentum. However, I think we're a music city, and I think maybe in the next 5 to 10 years we'll be a world music city again.
Nice. That is a beautiful point to end on. I want to thank all of the panelists for the really rich and open and honest discussion today, and looking forward to both the conversations ahead and also the actions that come out of this. And thanks to Low4 and to you.